way of looking at social stratification, and one that's pretty important when we study social inequality, is Karl Marx, a major sociologist who talked about economics and the relationship between the economy and society. So we're going to cover some of his major theoretical points. And so with Marx, he had a sort of important research question, and that is, how did this particular society come about? So when sociologists want to do a study, they always have a research question, and this was Marx's. He was living in a time of great economic change, and so this question is very important. Why is society the way it is today? Marx is known as a materialist, which means that he's interested in how the economic structure determines social relations, and then how ideas then reinforce that economic structure. And not only are there ideas that support the economic structure, but any ideas that contradict these social relations are repressed. So these ideas are typically the ideas of the ruling class. So he's really starting from the point of economics, the point of what he calls the means of production. The means of production is about how things are bought and sold, businesses and industry. There's those who own the means of production and those who work within them. He begins from a point of alienation, which means that there are people who are going to benefit from it, and there are people who are going to be alienated within this economic structure. And new historical periods emerge after the lower class, those who don't have control of the economic structure, they're going to revolt against the owners of production. So every time that happens, you will have a new economic structure. So he looks at the different economic structures, and the first one, he says that society started with what we call primitive communism, and this was a time where pure subsistence living was what the relations were like. People were working together, but they barely made enough for them to survive on. So in a sense, the problem with primitive communism is that there's no surplus. There's no way that people can do something other than just get their bare necessities. So that's going to change to agricultural communities, which are based on slavery. So there's a technology then at this point to preserve and therefore to produce a surplus, which allows for leisure. But there are only going to be a certain group of people that get to enjoy the leisure, and those who just have to work. Obviously, slavery is not very beneficial for slaves, and those are the people that are going to be really hard-pressed to change this structure. But the important thing with the agricultural community is that you do have a surplus, and that's going to be really important as a way of, you have leisure, you have time to do other things. And this, he says, has a lot to do with technology. So there's going to be real emphasis on technology to increase the surplus, and therefore increase the amount of production that's being done, and of course then allow for more leisure. So because there's slavery, there's going to be a revolt. Remember I talked about each historical period emerges after the lower classes revolt against the owners of production. So what replaces agricultural communities is serfdom. And so slaves here become serfs. They're not owned, and they get to acquire some of the property. They have more rights, but in return they have to get a percentage of their land or whatever they produce back to the lords. So because they get a percentage of the goods, it's going to increase the incentive for them to produce. And in this stage, technology has improved even more so that we have more surplus. So the labor power and means of production further progress. We get more production, we get a better way of doing it, and we have more surplus. But even though the serfs may own some of the goods, it's still not going to be good enough. So they're going to again revolt, and what we have is capitalism. Capitalism is based on wage labor. Here, serfs become workers, and they have then more rights, and they acquire capital. So they're not maybe getting a share of the crop, but they're actually getting money in return for the work that they do. The wage actually increases the incentive for both the worker and the owner. It encourages those who work to make more money, and it encourages the owner to reinvest the surplus to make even more money. So that's what sort of capitalism is based on, this issue of profit. Profit's going to be very important to make capitalism work on the long term. So Marx, in viewing this is where he kind of comes in as far as his historical time. He's going to see the transition from serfdom to capitalism, and he says, it didn't happen smoothly. We see capitalism as a pretty pervasive economic structure today, but in the mid to late 1800s, it wasn't smooth at all, and it required changes in laws, the way we think about economy and work, and the way we use money as a way of exchanging and determining value. So before that, you might have had more of a way of exchanging, say, like bread for flour, or cows for a chair. So this was a very subjective way of exchanging goods, because you could have a completely different set of economic relations with your neighbor as you would with someone who lived in the town or something like that. So when you have money, things become much more objective. There's a clear mathematical way of saying what something is worth. He says that capitalism happened successfully because of the wealth gain and colonization. The problem of scarcity was resolved because you had the technology now that can really maximize surplus. And then at this point, we devised an international credit system and national debt as a way of globalizing the capitalist economic structure. Again, he notes that the development of the wage makes it much more efficient to get work done over that of slave labor. In fact, most people note that you make more money if you pay people than if you force them not to pay. This is something that is sort of the controversy behind the Civil War, that actually, is to their incentive to pay people rather than to enslave them on an economic level, rather than, say, ideological, like civil rights or human rights. For Marx, of course, he's going to say there's some real problems with capitalism, so the worker is going to revolt as a way of trying to equalize the relationship, and communism is going to come about. So socialism would come about first, where a new party would emerge out of worker reforms, and the final stage would overcome scarcity through technology. And at this point, so the owners, people who didn't work within the industry, they would be replaced, and workers would own the means of production. They would own their own labor, their own work that they did. And the surplus would be used for communal needs rather than just profit alone, and would be shared equitably. He says this last stage, of course, requires a revolution. When Marx talks about this sort of shift from one stage to the next, he does it in a way that it's not linear. It's a dialectic process. It's something that takes time, and maybe you'll see residuals of the last stage in the present stage. So things don't happen overnight, they don't happen smoothly, but they require a lot of sort of working out the negatives, working out the problems with the last stage, and overcoming those problems. So for Marx, when he looks at the different stages, he's seeing a progression of freedom and a freedom from domination. And this is really important to him to explain why these changes are happening over time. So conditions are created to set this process in motion, which invariably leads to an ultimate transformation. So when the conditions are right, we'll see the next stage emerge. Domination has within it the conditions to overturn it. So once people critically evaluate the system and really understand, the forms of inequality, they'll want to overturn it. And it's within that kind of environment where you realize what can be done to make things more equitable. And Marx, in understanding this, is a structural explanation to change in society. It gives sort of a macro view of economic structures as a way to explain why things do change in society.